Matthew Driscoll, Matthew, Driscoll, Driscoll, head men's basketball coach at the University of North Florida.
All right, Coach Driscoll, could you go ahead and talk about how you've been conditioning your players since the end of last season, throughout the summer, and getting ready to play a couple of these big games in November?
Well, the one thing about athletes, and as you bring them in as high school students, they don't quite understand, and then as they move through as college students, they certainly gain more and more and more. And the ability to be conditioned, in my opinion, is the ability to recover. Conditioning is your ability to recover from whatever stress you've put on yourself, whatever stress you've put on your body, and your ability to regroup and get back to your normalcy so you can perform again with the great skills and talents that you've had. Conditioning and discipline has always been at the forefront of what we've done here now going into our 9th season. So it's really imperative for us to have the guys understand that conditioning is a lot more than just running lines. It's a lot more than just going out and doing 3 miles. It's a lot more. There's a lot more components to it. One of the components to it that we really strive for is the stretching component, the ability to get your body prepared, heated up, and able to take whatever is next as you continually build upon it. And then the other part of it, the cooling down part of it, I'm one of probably the fewest coaches in a country, because I've been around and I've been at other programs. I won't cut practice to make sure that we stretch. I will cut the time of the court to make sure that we always get a stretch. When we're traveling on the road and we get off a long trip, that's always part of what we're doing to get inside a hotel room to get us that stretch and that ability to get limber and loose. The other thing too that we do that's a little bit different, a little bit odd, is we do yoga. And I'm a very big component of it, not just in the preseason, but also throughout the season. Because the ability to put your body in unstable positions and have that ability to secure yourself, gather your center of your body, make sure you're balanced, so to speak. Yoga with core balls and doing different things like that really creates that opportunity, which again, all that stuff, the stretching, the yoga, the different things you do with kettlebell works, which also builds core, which is huge in conditioning. All those other little nuances that we do, they have a great impact on your ability to condition. Because of poor conditioning, as long as your limbs are doing what they're supposed to be doing, as long as you have that ability to do those things, I'm a big believer in, as you move through the season and as you get to that part, not only how you condition yourself, it's really important in basketball when you get to the stage of the season where you're ready to prepare to get on the floor and practice. That's one part of conditioning. So that usual 6 weeks that we have, we've got to make sure the guys are at a certain level. They won't be at basketball conditioning. So how do you go about that? 2 days a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays, we get on the floor and we'll do a series of teaching guys how to run better, teaching guys how to stride better, teaching guys how to explode better, teaching guys how the first 3 steps are most critical. And then there's a change of direction. There's either latitude or there's vertical. There's different ways in which you can gather that as well too. And then there's a running component where you're putting a stress on them. And the one thing about this that I've learned over the years, for instance, if you do a 4-minute game and you had to tell me they have to make 8 trips in a 4-minute game, then all of a sudden 2 weeks later you say you got to make 9. Their ability to make 9, they can do that very easily, because the 4 minutes, your mind is set watching the clock tick and how the clock ticks, but in reality you really have the ability to do more. So that's where the conditioning comes into play, the ability to recover, and it shows them a sense of what they're doing and how they're doing it. The other thing is, when you do that on Tuesday and Thursdays, you put your weights on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And part of what we do in weights is we make the weights as much of a conditioning factor as it is a strength factor. And what I mean by that is we move it at a higher pace. We're moving from station to station at a higher pace. The guys don't have to take weight off and put weight on. We have many people that are helping. So it's a little bit more high reps and repetition in the sense that they move faster. And because of that, there's a conditioning component that comes into play with it. So now we're getting conditioning. We're getting it from different aspects. And because of that, it all gels together and it goes. Then, about 4 weeks into the season, we'll go into boot camp. And boot camp is even more of that mental approach, which we all know is part of conditioning. Because in order to be conditioned, you have to be uncomfortable to be comfortable to know that you can do this. And then once you cross that barrier, once you get past that threshold, now the ability is that much more easier for you. And then you stay conditioned, and then your ability to recondition yourself is quicker, it's faster, less body wear and tear, and those kind of things. So the boot camp component is that 4th week, 5th week, somewhere in there, where we're not really peaking in the preseason, but it's pretty close. Once you've got to the end of that, and part of boot camp is different stations, part of boot camp is different running, part of boot camp is also an obstacle course where their conditioning is different, where they're moving core, where they're moving laterally, where they're moving weight, so to speak, in different aspects instead of just normalcy. And then you go out to the beach, you run on a sand, completely different. Now your foot isn't the same, so now you talk about being on the road, how every road venue is different, lighting's different, sound's different, baskets are different, all that stuff's different, but when the day's done, the course 94 by 50 and the baskets are 10 foot high. So that conditioning is a mental approach, which is just as much, or maybe even more important than the physical approach. And then once you get to that stage, you back down a little bit, you get their bodies recovered a little bit in this last week, and then you prepare for the next stage, because right now, we're only 8 hours a week. At the start of practice, you go to 20 hours a week. Now that includes videotape and stuff like that where they're not as physical. Once we get to there, we have about 6 weeks, 5 to 6 weeks to get them prepared for that first game against Michigan State on November 10th. So to do that, again, how do you build this? How do you grow this? How do you help maintain this and then get them to what people would say is basketball conditioning, going up and down the floor? There's been many studies done, and every possession is about a 5.5 trip up down the floor. Well, sometimes you're walking, sometimes you're jogging, and sometimes you're running. So when I mentioned the 4-minute game before, here's what that game is. You walk a length, you jog a length, and then you run a length. So it's very similar to the game of basketball. So you try to tie in those conditionings that have similarities to the game of basketball. Stopping and changing direction is another component of that as well too. So when you get to practice, because you can put the ball in their hand more, because the NCAA gives you more time to put their ball in their hand, you take that component, because in the preseason now, in the 8 hours, we only get 2 hours of basketball. So we do conditioning. We do full court with fewer guys. We do handling full court with different guys and stress upon them in quick 40-minute segments, and then they're out. And then a 40-minute segment the next day, and then they're out. And then a 40-minute segment, and then they're out. So that conditioning component now grows to an hour and 45. But you're getting them on the floor, you're going up and down the floor, and there's that difference when you have that ball in your hand. The running is different, the timing is different, the being knocked off your stride is different. That's where the yoga, that's where the kettlebell, that's where all those different explosions come into play as well too. So now when you get into the crux of your conditioning to prepare for your games, you have to make sure you maintain that conditioning and grow that conditioning. Now, do we still do some 4-minute games? Absolutely. Do we punish for losing? Absolutely. We push tires. It's conditioning, but it's really more to quit turning the ball over. But when we do these things, we build these things, and we're smart. So we hit Monday. Tuesday, we don't hit. Wednesday, we hit. Thursday, we're off. Friday, we don't hit. Saturday, we hit. Sunday we're off. So you have to be a little bit intelligent in conditioning to make sure their bodies can get them conditioned. Because if you're tearing them down, and they don't have the ability to recover, now they can never get to that, that supreme condition or that threshold that you want them to get to, that high level of being able to get up and down the floor and play like we played over the years. So what I found over the years is you can't pound. And we try not to pound twice in one day, even though we do every occasional, and we try not to pound twice in a row. Very rarely does it happen during a season where you play back-to-back games, but it will for us. Opening night, Friday night the 10th, Michigan State, Saturday, Michigan. So it's back-to-back. So your body does have to have some sort of resemblance of that. 1 week later, Mount St. Mary's Saturday, Wofford on Sunday. So every once in a while you have that scenario that comes to play. But again, that really tears down your body when you're playing that much and you're hitting that much. So we want to be smart, because again, that creates conditioning. Because when you remove people because they got an injury and they can't perform, now they lose that conditioning. So everything they build up, it kind of goes back, and now you have to get that back up again once they recover from what they're doing. The other thing is, as you move through this, we do a really good job of monitoring the guys through nutrition. We do a really good job of monitoring the guys through rehabilitation, through different machines that you can put on your body, cold tubs, Nordic, Game Ready, all these things, extra stretch, extra this, whether it be a chiropractor, whether it be a massage, all those things to make sure your body's firing and to make sure you're doing the things that you need to do in order to maintain conditioning. The other thing is, once we get to November 10th, over the years, you could probably count on a hand how many times we actually physically hit each other. Because we play so many games in such a short amount of time that if you continue to do that, and then you get them back and you do it again, plus you got to grow your program, you got to grow what you're doing. So that's a little double-edged sword, because we have a young team this year. So they need a little bit more on the floor and learning and those kind of things. When you got a veteran team, an older team like we've had, we back-to-back champions and played for a championship last year, you can do a little bit less because they understand, what's ahead of them, so to speak. So in that case, the conditioning is even different, where you're flying up and down the floor and you're doing more lateral of going than you are doing vertical, where you're putting less pounding, less stress on their knees, and you're doing more either shooting or going up and down or running, and you're keeping that tempo, you're keeping that timing, so to speak, and it helps keep that conditioning as well too. So that's kind of the phases. It's kind of how we go. It's kind of how we've developed it, and it's kind of how we've grown, and we've tweaked it, and we've changed it, and we've adapted to it. But the one thing that's been consistent has been the stretching before, the stretching after, the yoga throughout, and then the ability to read. I'm a runner, so I understand fatigue, and I understand the daily grind, and I understand sometimes how you feel. And we've got to make sure that our guys are letting us know and keeping us attuned. But part of that too is they have to sleep. They have to get off their legs. They have to nutrition. They have to drink fluids. They have rollers at home, real nice foam rollers at home. They have an accountability or responsibility in this just as much as we do in preparing for these different things that we do. So as you share this and you make sure you talk about this, then, Dallas Moore never missed a game in his life. Bo Beach never missed a game in his life. I mean, I could go down the list. Those are great players. They've never missed a game of their life. So, obviously there's some really, really good things. Now, if you get an accident like Garrett Sams, gets kneed in the ribs and breaks his rib, ain't got nothing to do with conditioning. But he only missed one game. So how much of the conditioning came into play with his healing and with his ability to recover and get back on the floor?
All right, Coach. Thank you very much.